They sang hymns louder when the scratching began. The sisters said the children were purified, but not one ever came home. In Ashcroft, prayer echoed louder than screams, because faith demanded it. Today, the building is gone. Not burned, not torn down, just gone. This isn't just about an orphanage. This is about what we let happen when faith is louder than fear. At the top of the ridge, where the trees refuse to grow, stands a building that once meant sanctuary. Stone walls, wooden shutters, and a bell tower that hasn't been touched in decades. Yet some say it still rings. Ashcroft Orphanage opened its doors in the winter of 1899. Built under the Carmelite order, it was meant to be a place of quiet discipline, of prayer, penance, and spiritual correction for unwanted children. The state funded it. The church sanctified it. But the people in the valley below, they didn't speak its name after sundown. Its architecture was rigid, almost punishing. Narrow corridors, small, high windows, and floors that creaked even under the weight of silence. Children were brought in from nearby townships, those orphaned by the mines or abandoned at church doors. Boys and girls as young as 4. Most never left. The Carmelite sisters who ran the place kept strict order. No toys, no laughter, only scripture, candlelight, and the ever-present sound of bells. They rang every 3 hours, for meals, for prayer, for correction. But something wasn't right. Locals began to notice that the bells rang, even when they shouldn't. In the spring of 1901, a group of nearby farmers gathered at the south edge of the woods. They'd been hearing it 3 chimes, deep and deliberate, around 2:40 a.m. every night. At first, they assumed it was clockwork, a timer mechanism inside the belfry. But when the parish mechanic climbed up to check, he found the rope had been severed, not frayed, cut clean. With something sharp, he reattached it. That night, the bells rang again, so they cut the rope themselves, pulled it out completely, locked the wooden hatch to the belfry shut, and 2 nights later, the bells rang louder than ever. They began calling it God's warning. Inside, the children weren't allowed to speak of the bells. Discipline was swift and precise. Sister Aurelia, the Mother Superior, taught that sound was sacred, and questioning it was a sin. But one girl did speak. Her name was Clara Miles, 8 years old, brought in after both her parents drowned in the river. She'd been caught sketching something in her psalter, a tall, robed figure standing beneath the bell tower with a mouth where its eye should have been. She was caned. Her Bible burned. 2 nights later, Clara vanished from her room. The nuns claimed she'd run away, but the grounds were locked, and the snow outside showed no footprints, only drag marks. The church sent no investigators. The sheriff wrote it off, but Father Mallory, a visiting priest from Boston, wasn't convinced. He had arrived for Lent services and noticed something that unsettled him. During Mass, none of the children made eye contact. They spoke in perfect unison. Every amen sounded empty, as if it had been memorized by force, not faith. And on the 3rd night of his stay, while sleeping in the West Wing, he heard the bells, but not just ringing. He heard breathing, a slow inhale, right beneath the bell tower floorboards, followed by a sound he described as teeth grinding over wet stone. He left the next morning. His journal, later discovered in a Boston rectory, recorded a single line written in shaken ink. It rings when they remember. By 1910, Ashcroft's enrollment had tripled. The state praised its discipline and cost efficiency. The Vatican issued commendations. But inside, things deteriorated. Children developed nervous tics, staring episodes. They'd wake screaming but never remember their dreams. Several began suffering from auditory hallucinations. One boy, Marcus Eldon, had to be restrained after attacking a nun during prayer. He claimed she was whispering from inside the bell. He was moved to solitary confinement for 7 days. On the 8th, they found his bed empty and his fingernails embedded in the chapel door. He was never seen again. Parents were rarely allowed to visit, and when they did, the children smiled. Too much, like they'd been rehearsing. One mother wrote that her son's voice sounded borrowed. Another swore the bells rang when she approached the gates. Though the nuns insisted the ropes had been removed completely. In 1923, an anonymous letter was sent to the Diocese of Pittsburgh. It described ritual corrections involving forced prayer beneath the bell tower at night. Children left alone, punished, told to listen for the voice of heaven. The letter ended with a single sentence: "He speaks through the iron." No inquiry was made, no response sent. By 1945, Ashcroft was fading. The order's influence had waned, funding had slowed. Only a handful of children remained. One final winter, one final ringing. In January of that year, a fire broke out in the East Wing. No cause was ever determined. 3 children died. The others were relocated. Ashcroft was sealed, the bell tower boarded up, the property sold, and left untouched. But some say the bells still ring. Not every night, not always loud, but if you stand beneath the old ridge at exactly 2:40 a.m. and the wind dies down, you'll hear 3 deep chimes. Measured, slow, almost thoughtful. As if something is still waiting. And that's when they remember. The frame lingers on a stone crucifix, weathered by decades of wind and cold, half swallowed by ivy. Snow gathers at its base, undisturbed, as if the ground itself knows better than to trespass. The camera drifts lower. To the arched doorway of Ashcroft's chapel. The wooden door hangs crooked. Beneath it, the stone steps vanish into darkness. Called it the chapel cellar, but no one ever said it aloud. From the moment Ashcroft Orphanage opened, silence wasn't just preferred, it was demanded, not just in tone, but in doctrine. The rule wasn't written on paper, it wasn't nailed to the chapel wall, but the children knew it better than scripture. Silence is sanctity. No idle chatter, no questions, no laughter. A spoken word without prayer was considered a wound against the holy, a noise that cut through grace. They were told that God lived in the quiet, and the more they spoke, the further they drifted from him. Sister Aurelia enforced this with flawless calm. Her voice. When heard. Was soft and deliberate, almost hypnotic. She never shouted. She didn't need to. One glance, and a child would fall silent. But some didn't, especially the younger ones. The ones too new to understand what the silence was hiding. In 1902, a boy named Elias started humming during morning prayer. He didn't know the rule yet, hadn't yet heard the whisper warnings from the others. That afternoon, he was taken down the steps behind the altar into the cellar by 2 older boys, handpicked by the order, a kind of ritual escort. He returned before dawn, but he wasn't the same. Elias wouldn't speak, wouldn't blink, wouldn't respond to his name. When asked what had happened, he simply looked past them, toward the bell tower. As if waiting for it to ring. Another child, Miriam, age 7, was caught whispering during lessons. She and another girl had been tracing words into the frost on the window pane. They were taken. 3 days later, Miriam came back alone. She screamed whenever anyone touched her. By nightfall, she had torn out chunks of her own hair. She was moved to a private cell in the West Wing. The door was bolted from the outside. She never left that room again. But sometimes, the others would hear her at night, not crying, repeating a single line over and over. I heard what he said. Ashcroft's silence wasn't peaceful. It was absolute. Even during meals, the children chewed in unison. Forks and spoons moved rhythmically, choreographed like mass. If a plate dropped. If a single cough broke the cadence. Heads would turn. Not the nuns. The children. As if something in them feared the noise more than the punishment. And yet, the cellar never stayed empty for long. Witness accounts. Few and quietly spoken. Mention the smell first. A mixture of old stone, melted wax, and something like mildew that never dried. A faint rot, not quite flesh, not quite earth. One boy, who later fled Ashcroft as a teenager, described the cellar as too silent. He said it made his ears ring. that there were no echoes, not even footsteps, like the air itself was listening. He wouldn't say what happened down there, but he kept the lights on. For the rest of his life, Ashcroft staff denied the existence of any punishments. Official logs claimed all behavioral correction was pastoral, but the local doctor, one of the few outsiders allowed into the grounds, told a different story. He was called once, in 1915, to tend to a girl who had fallen down the chapel stairs. Her skull was fractured, but her lips had been sewn shut, not crudely, delicately, precisely, with black thread. The nuns called it self-inflicted, but the doctor's notes described restraint bruises on her arms and wrists. The next day, he returned with a constable. They were not allowed through the gates. No charges were filed, and no further medical visits were ever requested. The children began developing their own ways of coping. They learned to pray without moving their lips. They made up a kind of silent sign language, one the sisters never seemed to notice or care about. Some scratched messages into the underside of their bed frames. Simple phrases. Are you awake? Do you hear him? One message appeared in 6 different beds, carved by different hands. Don't look at the stairs. By the 1930s, the doctrine of silence had become so ingrained that even new caretakers, brought in from outside orders, found it disquieting. One nun, Sister Catherine, left after only 4 months. She was seen walking out through the snow without her shoes. She didn't speak. She wouldn't stop crying. She entered a convent in Maine and never took another assignment. Asked why, she wrote a single sentence in her departure letter. They made us kneel with him in the dark. But she never explained what she meant by him. The last documented use of the chapel cellar was in 1943. 2 boys were brought down. Only one came back up. The other was said to have escaped. But the snow outside that night was untouched. No footsteps, no drag marks. Just a trail of wax. From the chapel door to the open cellar hatch. The nuns sealed the stairs the following morning. And locked the chapel for good. But even now, decades later, something lingers in the walls of Ashcroft. Visitors, those few brave enough to trespass, say the silence is heavy. Not just quiet, heavy, like it's pushing back, like something is still holding its breath beneath the chapel floor, waiting for a voice, any voice. To break the silence again. Snow falls softly across the Ashcroft grounds, settling like dust on stone. The windows of the chapel remain dark, but if you stand close enough, if you press your ear to the glass, you might hear singing. It began in the winter of 1929. The orphanage had entered its 3rd decade. Fewer staff, fewer inspections. The Carmelite order claimed it was adapting to a more contemplative regimen, emphasizing worship over instruction. But inside Ashcroft's walls, the children were being rehearsed. Every night at midnight, the orphans were woken and brought barefoot into the chapel. No candles, no fire, just the cold stone and the slow shuffle of bodies learning not to shiver. They called it the offering, a single hymn, sung in Latin, once, then silence, the same melody every night. Domini, audi vos meum, Lord, hear my voice. But something wasn't right. There were only 6 children remaining by then. The rest had either been relocated or quietly disappeared from record. Yet the hymn never sounded like 6 voices, caretakers, and eventually, nearby, residents began reporting the same thing. The first few lines always matched the number, but as the hymn continued, more voices would join in, layered, smooth, in perfect harmony. 24, maybe more, some high and childlike. Others, not. The recordings weren't made public at first. In fact, only one was ever preserved, labeled Ashcroft Devotional Deck 3, 1932. The reel-to-reel was part of a larger diocesan archive recovered in 1971. Most of the tape had degraded, but this one remained strangely intact. At first, it sounds like any old chapel hymn. A little static, a little hiss, but as it plays, The voices rise, not just in volume, in number, and then ... Underneath the final verse comes something else, not a voice, a sound, wet, ragged, like someone crying with their mouth closed. And then a long inhale, drawn out, shaking, like lungs that hadn't been used in years. The audio cuts there, but the fear didn't start with the tape. It started with the children. After the second month of midnight hymns, one girl collapsed during the home offering. Her name was Lydia, 11 years old, healthy. Prior to that night, she fell face first onto the chapel floor mid-hymn. She was carried out, unresponsive. When the doctor arrived hours later, her lips were still moving, mouthing words no one could hear. No pulse, no breath, but she kept singing. She was kept under observation in the infirmary for 4 days. Her body remained motionless. But each night, at midnight, her mouth would move in rhythm to the hymn. On the 5th night, it stopped, and so did her heart. The nuns held a closed casket burial. No visitors allowed. The children were never told, but that didn't stop them from hearing her voice again. The very next night, during the offering, she's still in the 3rd verse, one boy whispered. She always starts there now. The chapel organ had long since been stripped down, pipes corroded, pedals locked in place. No electricity in the walls, but witnesses claimed they still heard it, a deep, groaning chord beneath the voices, like the chapel itself was playing along. It wasn't just the voices that disturbed the few who heard them. It was their spacing, perfect rhythm, every vowel evenly matched. No breath between phrases. As if the choir wasn't inhaling. Ever. Sister Magdalene. The youngest of the remaining Carmelite caretakers, wrote a private letter to her cousin in Ohio. In it, she described her growing unease. They never blink. They never cough. I watch Thomas sing with blood on his chin and no expression. I don't think they know what they're singing anymore. I don't think it's their voices. The letter was never mailed. It was found in her desk drawer, next to a length of rosary chain, bent into a perfect circle. She disappeared the following week. Some say she was sent back to the mother house. Others weren't so sure. One local ... a groundskeeper who maintained the road to Ashcroft's outer gate ... claimed he saw her walking toward the woods. Just after midnight, he called her name. She didn't look back, but he heard humming, melody he'd never heard before. When he told the church, he was let go. No explanation, no severance. Just a letter warning him not to speak to the press. He, DIDN single quotes T. until 1983. When he finally gave a recorded statement to a private investigator researching Ashcroft's collapse. In that interview, he said something that still unsettles archivists today. It wasn't just singing, it was practicing. They were practicing being dead. By 1935, only 4 children remained. The hymn continued, nightly, without fail, and the number of voices never dropped. In fact, some listeners claimed it increased. One visiting priest, ... Father Renner, attempted to interrupt the offering by pulling the children from their pews during rehearsal. They resisted, not violently, but their mouths never stopped moving. Even when physically restrained, they kept singing. Father Renner left that night and refused to give Mass at any institution ever again. He was later institutionalized after attempting to deafen himself with a fire iron. When asked why, he said, "It was in the harmony. Something was hiding in it, something that wanted in." After that year, all references to Ashcroft's musical practices were removed from diocesan logs. No more recordings, no more visitors. And eventually, no more children. The orphanage officially closed its doors in 1945, but trespassers, those who climbed the gate in the early 70s, before the site was sealed. Reported something strange. The chapel floor was covered in fine dust, except for the pews. 6 of them, each with clean, child-sized impressions. And at the altar, a reel-to-reel recorder, still plugged into the wall. No power. No tape inside. But the play button was pressed down, and that's when he heard it, a faint hum, so soft it sounded like air itself was singing just beneath the surface waiting for a voice to join it. The camera moves slowly through the chapel at dawn. Light filters through stained glass, bleeding soft reds and golds onto the pews below. Dust dances in the silence, untouched, undisturbed, as if the building itself is still listening. Beneath the altar, something was found. A rusted tin box, wedged under the foundation stones, wrapped in damp cloth, bound in rosary wire. Inside, a journal. It belonged to Father Mallory, the last priest assigned to Ashcroft, transferred quietly in 1933 under the order of the Carmelite chapter house in Ohio. Father Mallory was sent to stabilize morale. The orphanage had lost 3 nuns in 2 months. Official records called it voluntary reassignment, but the truth was buried deeper. Mallory arrived in September. He was 42, mild-mannered, trained in doctrine and obedience. Not counseling, not trauma, and certainly not Ashcroft. His journal begins modestly. Simple entries, notes on the building's disrepair, remarks on the quietness of the children. But even in the first few pages, there is something uneasy in his tone. September 11th, 1933. The children pray with their eyes open. I've asked them to close them, but they won't. When I insist, they begin to hum. In perfect pitch. By mid-October, his notes shift. He begins recording symptoms. 4 children develop fevers. All above 103.1 collapses during morning confession. No marks, no cause. Her lips are blue. But she isn't cold. She keeps murmuring the same phrase. He lives beneath us. The next entry is dated 2 days later, October 16th, 1933. Sister Agnes has vanished. No one saw her leave. Her room was locked from the inside. Candles burned down to the plate. Her veil was folded neatly on the floor. I asked Sister Aurelia why no alarm was raised. She said, "We don't speak of departures." Father Mallory writes every day after that. His script changes. Hurried, smaller, sometimes barely legible. He begins referring to things obliquely, using initials instead of names, referring to the children as choristers, the nuns as shadows. One entry spans 3 pages. He describes a noise in the cellar. Rhythmic, like the wheeze of a pump, but mechanical inspection finds nothing. Still, every night at 2 a.m., the floor beneath his bed begins to vibrate. Soft at first, and stronger. Always ending with silence, and a single sound from the chapel. 3. Slow knocks. November 2nd, 1933. I have stopped sleeping. My nose bleeds at dawn. My eyes are changing shape in the mirror. Or I am. I confessed this to Sister Magdalene. She wept and whispered, "It's starting in you now." He requests transfer. No reply. He writes again. No response. He attempts to call the diocese. The line is disconnected. By November 10th, he writes only in fragments, scattered images, eyes behind the glass. They move when I turn my back. The choir doesn't breathe. And then one entry. Dated November 21st, changes everything. They don't die. They change. He writes it 6 times. No context. No follow up. Just that line. It is the last. Full entry. After that, the pages become erratic. Ink blots, scribbles, small drawings of the chapel floor with strange geometric notations. He diagrams a spiral, over and over, always with 7 turns. Beneath one of the spirals, he writes, "This is where he's buried." There are no dated entries after December, but one final page remains. Written in what appears to be charcoal, smeared across the back cover. Not buried, waiting. And then, nothing. Father Mallory was never reported. Missing. No death certificate. No transfer on file. According to church records, he completed his assignment in 1934 and returned to Ohio, but no parish in the state ever received him. And no church bears his name. The journal was discovered in 1968 by a demolition crew surveying the chapel. They weren't told to look under the altar, but one of the men said he heard something, a soft ticking, like breath, slowed down. When he pulled up this tile, the stone beneath was cracked and hollow. They found the journal beneath a lattice of candle, stubs and rusted nails. But something else was in the box. A single vertebra, human, charred at the edges, wrapped in cloth soaked through with oil. It was never catalogued. The box was resealed, sent to a private archive, and the crew was paid to remain silent. But one man, the foreman, kept a copy of the journal's final page. He carried it folded in his wallet until he died. His daughter found it years later. The charcoal was still faintly visible, not buried, waiting. Ashcroft was never rebuilt. The chapel remains sealed. But those who live nearby say the ground still shifts, especially in winter, especially near the altar. As if something underneath is breathing. Slowly. And getting closer. A lone country road curves through the mist, framed by bare trees and brittle grass. A single car waits at the gates of the old Ashcroft property, engine idling. Inside, a little girl doesn't speak, just stares at the chapel. In 1951, 6 years after the orphanage had officially closed, a child named Clara Brom was adopted by the Halberts, a well-to-do couple from Wilkes-Barre. She was listed as 7 years old. Though no birth certificate was provided. The adoption was handled through a diocesan intermediary, a retired nun who'd overseen clerical records at Ashcroft's final stage. Her name was Sister Annalise, and she provided one sentence when asked why Clara had not been placed earlier. She was still learning silence. The Halberts had no children of their own. They'd been on the waiting list for over 2 years, but when they arrived at the facility to meet Clara, a private residence, not the orphanage. She was already packed. Dressed in black. Her face covered with a red veil, not satin, not cotton, but something coarse, handmade, almost ceremonial. She did not speak during the ride home. She didn't respond to questions, but when she saw the church steeple near their neighborhood, she smiled. They thought it was nerves. The first few days were quiet. Clara remained distant but polite. She never asked for anything, never cried, never raised her voice. She spent most of her time in the hallway, standing beneath the house's antique crucifix. She watched it, not like a child might admire it, but like she was, waiting for it to move. The Halberts reported the first incident on the 5th night. Mrs. Halbert had walked past Clara's room and noticed a low murmur. At first, she assumed it was humming, but when she opened the door, Clara was kneeling at the foot of her bed, head bowed, eyes closed, and her mouth moving in precise rhythm, speaking Latin fluently, deliberately, words that neither parent recognized. Recorded a portion and sent it to the local parish. The priest who reviewed it identified the language as a corrupted form of ecclesiastical Latin, but twisted, backward structure. References that shouldn't exist in liturgy. One line translated, roughly as, "My voice is not my own." When questioned, Clara denied ever speaking. She didn't remember kneeling. She didn't remember the night at all. But something wasn't right. Over the next few days, objects began to move. Nothing dramatic. A candlestick shifted. A cabinet opened slightly. The crucifix in the hallway tilted. Just a little. Always between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. When the Halberts asked Clara if she'd been out of bed, she only smiled. Not with her mouth, but with her eyes. On the 12th night, they found her kneeling again, this time in their bedroom, facing the wall, murmuring softly in that same slow cadence. When Mr. Halbert touched her shoulder, she turned. Her eyes were open, but unfocused, tracking something that wasn't there, and her mouth kept moving, even though no sound was coming out. Mrs. Halbert screamed. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. By morning, she was silent. Again, apologetic. Confused. She asked if she could return to the church. They assumed she meant Sunday service, but when they asked which one, she pointed toward the hills, toward Ashcroft. They returned her the next day. The adoption agency accepted her without question. No refund was offered. No explanation given. Clara did not cry. She did not hug them, but as they drove away, she began to sing a hymn neither parent recognized. 3 notes. Then silence. 2 days later, she was gone. Not missing. Gone. The facility where she had been housed was found empty. Doors open, beds unmade. The other children, if there had been any. Were unaccounted for. No records remained. Only the crucifix in the hallway was still tilted. But that wasn't the end. Months later, the Alberts received a package. No return address. Inside, a red veil. Folded. Pressed flat between the pages of a hymnal marked Ashcroft Choir, 1932. No note, but one page was dog-eared. The song, Domini, audivos mean, Lord, hear my voice. They burned the veil, but the next morning, a new one appeared. Folded. At the foot of their bed. That was the last straw. They left Pennsylvania that month, changed their names, moved to Illinois. But the wife, Eleanor Halbert, never slept again without a light on. She was found dead in 1968. A candle had overturned on her knit stand. There was no fire, but her mouth was blackened. As if burned from the inside. The coroner called it heart failure, but her husband insisted otherwise. In his only interview before his death, he said something strange. She came back for the voice. That's all she ever wanted. Clara was never seen again. Not officially. But travelers near Ashcroft claim that sometimes, just before sunrise, they see a figure at the edge of the woods. Small, still, face covered in red, humming softly, like she's remembering something, or waiting to be remembered. The wind moves slow through the frame, brushing dead leaves across a cracked foundation. A tape measure dangles from a rusted beam, caught in the branches of a thorned bush, its end still pulled taut, but there's no hand holding it. In 1962, the Ashcroft property was purchased by a private restoration firm. The church had relinquished all claim. Officially, the orphanage was deemed structurally unsalvageable, but investors had other ideas. They wanted to turn the site into a religious retreat, pilgrimage location, stillness, history, clean air. They expected crumbling floors. They expected asbestos. They didn't expect the building to fight back. Surveyor teams began work in October. The initial blueprints were pulled from diocesan records, dated 1898. They included standard layouts for the era: dormitories, chapel, servant quarters, cellar. But as the team progressed, something didn't match. Rooms were measured, walls marked, grids laid out. And the numbers came back wrong. Some walls were too thick, others hollow. One hallway was discovered behind the main staircase. A corridor not on any plan. 10 feet long. Door at the end. The knob wouldn't turn. So they broke it open, and behind it, bricks stacked solid, floor to ceiling, but no mortar, just pressure, tight as bone. The team chalked it up to late-stage construction, maybe a canceled extension. They logged it, photographed it. And moved on. But then it happened again. In the east wing, where the nursery had once stood, one worker noticed strange airflow, cold drafts that didn't match any open window or vent. He removed a panel behind the radiator, found a passage, narrow, sloped downward, lit a match. The flame went out in seconds. No wind, just absence. He stepped inside and never came back out. His name was Peter Holloway. 20-9, hired on contract. No prior health issues. No sound was heard. No sign of struggle, but his boots were later found 10 feet from the opening, still laced. Still warm. After that, the restoration paused. Security was brought in. Diocesan oversight returned, and that's when they found the new plans buried in the archive. A revised blueprint, dated 1934, stamped Privatus. The pages were brittle, half burned at the corners. but legible. They showed something the original did not: a saw basement. Directly beneath the chapel, 3 rooms, 1 staircase, and a single notation in Latin beside the lowest room: non edificata, sed memorata. Not built, but remembered. The contractor in charge, Walter Briggs, was a practical man. He dismissed the plans as fiction, priestly myth-making, decorative notations. But he agreed to search the foundations anyway. The team brought in ground-penetrating radar. The scans were inconclusive. They showed variants, cavities, but not where they should be. One cavity appeared to extend beneath the altar, in a curved shape, like a loop or spiral, but no one could find an access point. No stairs, no hatch, solid floor, until one morning, when a worker returned early to retrieve his jacket and found the chapel door wide open. The floor had changed. Not the color, not the shape, the grain. As if the stone had been cut. And there, in the center of the nave, was a circle of dust, perfectly round, 4 feet wide. When the others arrived, the dust was gone, but the floor was warm. No fire had been lit. No sunlight had reached that room in years. They called in the structural engineer. He tapped the floor with a mallet. Once, twice. On the 3rd tap, it rang. Hollow. Like a bell. But something wasn't right. When he pressed his ear to the stone, he heard breathing. Not wind. Not pipes. Breathing. Slow, wet, almost deliberate. He stood up. Left the room and never returned to the site again. He wouldn't explain why. He just said, "There's no way to build a room that doesn't end." After that, morale broke. 2 workers quit. One refused to enter the chapel again, and another, Carl Dwyer, began sleeping in his truck. He told co-workers he heard voices at night. Not loud, but persistent. Always saying the same thing: "You forgot us." 1 week later, Carl was found parked outside the southern gate. The engine was running, but he wasn't inside. His flashlight lay on the seat, his clipboard on the dash. And in the dirt outside the driver's door, 3 bare footprints. Small. Child-sized. The project was shut down in early 6/3. No formal explanation, just a notice from the church: environmental hazard, spiritual and structural. Today, the Ashcroft building remains sealed, but those who trespass, those foolish enough to break the lock, often report the same experience. Rooms don't line up. Windows show hallways. Doors lead back to where you started. As if the building is rearranging itself. Slowly. Like something remembering what it used to be. Or what it still wants to become. One photographer, exploring the chapel with infrared film, captured something that was never explained. A glowing outline, staircase descending. Mitter. Right in the middle of the sanctuary floor. But when he stepped forward to find it, his leg went numb. As if he'd stepped through something. He turned back immediately, but the numbness stayed for weeks. And in his sleep, he started walking. Always toward the basement. Even in his own home, he told his wife the same thing, over and over in his dreams. They're still building it. Ashcroft's floor plans remain on file, but no one agrees which version is correct. The official prints list 14 rooms, the archives say 19. And the engineer, the one who tapped the floor, swears he counted 21. He's since gone blind. No medical cause. Just darkness. That's how he describes it. As if the last thing he saw was still inside him. The sky above Ashcroft was the color of stone, heavy, breathless, waiting. Crows circled above the chapel's belfry, though the bell had long been removed. Nothing had rung in years. And yet the air still trembled. In March of 1973, 2 men arrived without notice. They came from Rome. Travel records list their arrival under Vatican diplomatic credentials. Names redacted. Their itinerary: 1 night, no lodging, no press. They were sent to see something. The request came directly from the Pontifical Commission for Sacred Sites, a body that publicly no longer exists. The men arrived in black sedans with no plates. Their robes bore no insignia. Their luggage held only 3 items: a censer, a flask of oil, and a thick black volume bound in waxed cord. One witness, a groundskeeper assigned to escort them, said they spoke perfect English, but asked no questions. They refused food. They refused sleep. They walked the property in silence. Measured. As if taking stock of something that hadn't stopped growing. They began in the chapel. Then the dormitories. Then the cellar. And finally, just before dusk, they stood at the cracked stone where the altar once. The older one knelt, pressed his palm to the ground. And whispered something. Low, slow. But when the groundskeeper stepped closer, he said the man's lips weren't moving. Only his hand. It pulsed. As if the floor beneath it were echoing. He looked away, but when he looked back, the stone was bleeding, hairline cracks, each one dripping something dark, not fast, not fresh. Like memory. That night, the 2 men remained inside the chapel after sealing the doors behind them. No one knows exactly what happened next, but reports from nearby residents began pouring in after midnight. One described a red glow behind the stained glass, flickering, pulsing, like breath caught in flame. Another swore she heard chanting, not loud. Just beneath the wind, layered voices, moving in reverse. But it was the third report that stood out. A boy, no more than 9, claimed he saw a man on fire standing at the chapel door, not burning, not screaming, just glowing. And in his hand, held aloft, a rope, still swinging. As if it had just rung a bell. But something wasn't right. The chapel had no bell, hadn't for years. By morning, the 2 emissaries emerged. Unharmed. But pale. They spoke only once, to the diocesan official assigned to meet them. They handed over a sealed envelope and said, "It has been contained." No explanation. No ritual was ever documented. But for the first time in decades, the church acted swiftly. That afternoon, a direct order arrived from the Roman Curia. Ashcroft was to be permanently sealed, not demolished. Not converted. Sealed. The phrase used in internal correspondence was architectural suppression, a term not found in any civil engineering manual. The envelope never opened publicly, but years later, in a leak believed to have come from within the Vatican itself. Fragments of the report surfaced. Photographs. Symbols carved into the floor. Circles within circles. Converted prayers. One line, translated from Latin, appeared at the top of the page. The voices remain, but they are deaf now. What that meant, no one would say, but one of the emissaries. The younger one vanished from church records 6 months later. No obituary. No reassignment. Only a single note in the Vatican ledger. Redacted, status unknown. But a librarian from the Gregorian archives claims to have seen something unusual. A book returned, never checked out, leather-bound, thick, amp at the edges. Inside. Only one phrase written again and again in fading ink. They do not forgive. The other emissary, the elder, remained in Rome until his death in 1981. His final days were spent in silence. He refused communion. He refused confession. He was found collapsed at his writing desk, his hands pressed flat against a page he never finished. It said was, "We should have buried the ground itself." Today, Vatican representatives refused to discuss Ashcroft. All references to the orphanage have been removed from public ecclesiastical archives, but the land was never sold, never transferred. It remains property of the Holy See, unmaintained, overgrown. But watch. Every few years, a team returns. No announcement. No paperwork. They stay one night. Just before the spring equinox. They bring candles. They bring oil. And they walk the perimeter of the chapel in silence. No words. Only steps. Measured. Even. As if they're making sure. The floor still remembers what was written into it, still holds, still listens. But 1 year, 1994, something changed. A member of the team failed to return. He wasn't reported missing. No obituary. No internal memo. Just a line added to the Vatican's private map of the property. A small red dot near the southeast wall, labeled Dormians. Sleeping. That was the last update. Floor plan hasn't changed since. But those who study the map notice something strange. Each year, another dot appears. Always red, always smaller, always closer to the chapel. As if the land itself is closing in, like breath drawn and held. Waiting to exhale. The chapel walls swell with damp. Mold webs the corners like veins, black and quiet. The altar cloth, untouched for years, has begun to rot from the inside. Though no moisture ever touched it. And on the floor beneath the pulpit, a small pile of white dust that returns every morning. The last nun to leave Ashcroft was Sister Eugenia. She was 71. She had served at the orphanage for nearly 5 decades. Arriving in 1927, when the choir was still full and the morning bells rang without pulling the rope. But by 1974, she was alone. The other sisters had either died or vanished, and the children, the few who remained, were silent. She left, without ceremony. No escort. No church. Witness. Just a single bag and a sealed letter she handed directly to the local parish priest. In it, a confession and a warning. She wrote of a slow change that began years earlier, not with fire or collapse, but with something smaller. Taste. She first noticed it during morning communion. The wafers, they were different. Not in shape, not in size, but in smell. They carried a faint bitterness, like oil burned too long. And when placed on the tongue, they crumbled without weight. Dry, cold. And then came the blood. At first, it was one child, a girl named Margaret. She wept during Mass. Not loudly, not from pain, but when Sister Eugenia approached, she found blood on the girl's chin. When asked what happened, Margaret simply said, "He bit back." The next day, it was 2 children. Then 5. Each one complaining that the Eucharist scratched their mouth. One boy refused to open his lips. He held the wafer between his fingers and whispered to it. The priest assumed it was a game, a tantrum. But when he took the wafer to dispose of it, it was warm. Still. As if it had been alive. But something wasn't right. The sacramental host had not been reordered in weeks. The boxes arrived, sealed, fresh. But when opened, the wafers inside were pale gray, softer than they should have been. And there was a sound. Faint. Like breath held in a glass jar. They dismissed it as stress. Too much work. Too many hours. But Sister Eugenia stopped taking communion herself. Kept one wafer hidden, wrapped in cloth, placed inside a jar of blessed salt. She stored it beneath her bed, and every night, she said it moved. Not far, not loud. Just once, a tiny scratch. As if something inside it wanted out. She brought it to the bishop. He said nothing, only stared, then told her to return it. To place it back in the chapel. Back on the altar. When she refused, her keys were taken. She was assigned to prayer duty. Only. No contact with the children. No access to the host. But one night, she snuck in, back through the vestry. She opened the tabernacle. Inside, no wafers. Just dust. And underneath the cloth, teeth. Small. Like baby teeth, arranged in a circle, facing inward. She dropped the lid and fled. Her letter describes that night in detail. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She waited until morning. And when she returned to the altar, the teeth were gone. But there, in their place, was a single wafer. Red. Not stained, not dyed. Red. Pressed with a symbol she had never seen. A circle broken through with a vertical line. Like a needle threaded through an open mouth. She took it, wrapped it again, and fled the orphanage for good. But even after leaving, she could still taste it. In her sleep. In the back of her throat. Like ash, like something unfinished. She tried to destroy the wafer. Burn it. It wouldn't. Catch. Tried to bury it. The soil turned black. Finally, she brought it to a Hermitage in Vermont, a silent order known for keeping what the church cannot destroy. She handed it over. No questions were asked. They took it into the basement. She was told never to speak of it again. But 2 years later, that Hermitage burned to the ground. No cause. No survivors. Only the chapel bell remained. Half melted. But intact. The investigation found no evidence of arson. But in the ashes, a circle was discovered, etched into the stone beneath the altar. The same shape, broken circle, vertical line, and in the center. Charred but untouched. A single communion wafer, still red. Still whole. Sister Eugenia died in 1983. Her final confession was made on tape. 1 hour. Most of it whispered, but one line is clear. It was never his body. It was always theirs. Tape was archived, then stolen. No copy exists. But the priest who recorded it was never seen again, and the parish where it was kept shuttered in 1991 due to ritual inconsistencies. The altar was removed, the Eucharist refracted, but the floor beneath the tabernacle, always cold, even in summer. And when the renovation team broke the seal, they found blood in the floorboards. Not soaked. Not pooled. But drawn. Like ink. A single Latin phrase. Pactum est. It is sealed. To this day, travelers who pass Ashcroft after dark sometimes report strange smells in the air. Not smoke. Not soil. But burning bread. And in the silence between wind gusts, if you stop walking, some say you can still hear it. Low hum. A dry whisper. As if something is still being chewed. Slowly. On both sides of the veil. Ashcroft stood silent beneath a sky the color of burned parchment. The grass had browned out months before. No birds. No wind. Just stillness. Like a held breath. Long past comfort. By 1989, the orphanage was no longer debated. It had been buried in paperwork, sealed in policy, forgotten by the diocese, but not by the landowners. A development firm, Everholt Properties, purchased the acreage in late spring. Their plan was efficient. Demolish what remained of the structure. Rezone. Rebuild. No ceremony. No permission needed. They filed permits, scheduled the crew, hired local men to work fast and quiet. The date set, July 17th. The crew arrived early. 7 men. 3 machines. All standing at the edge of the field by 6 a.m. The sun hadn't yet crested the hill, and still, it was hot. Too hot. But not in the way they expected. Not the air. It was the ground. The soil beneath their boots radiated heat. Too much heat. It felt alive, like breath trapped beneath flesh. No one commented. They just kept moving. The first strike came at 6:42. An excavator was sent to breach the eastern dormitory wall. It never touched it. The moment the arm extended, its hydraulics locked, frozen in motion. No malfunction alert. No fault in the system. Just stillness. They climbed up to check. The steel was cold. Too cold. Condensation slicked its surface. One worker reached out. His hand snapped back. His skin had stuck, like frostbite, but it was already hot. The sun was up, 82 degrees in the shade, and that's when they saw it. Smoke, not from engines, not from tools, from the chapel. A thin thread at first, and waves. Gray, dense, but it didn't rise. It dropped slowly like something bleeding. Downward. They radioed in. Evacuation procedures started, but the fire, it wasn't normal. It didn't spread. It didn't devour. It selected. One machine ignited instantly. The frame bent. Rubber liquefied, but the grass beneath it stayed green, untouched. A toolbox exploded from heat. Inside, the hammer had frozen. The fire. Moved, not in lines, but limbs, tendrils, slithering over surfaces, avoiding some, reaching for others. They ran, All but one. Alan Moretti, the last sighting of him, walking toward the chapel. They shouted. He didn't answer. One man swears Alan paused at the entrance, lifted a hand, and smiled, like he saw something he recognized. The flames curled behind him, never touching him. Then the rest fled. The fire overtook everything. Machines, field, sky. Everything. But the chapel and the crucifix. It should have burned, wooden, cracked, dry with age. But it stood, silent, still, iced. When emergency crews arrived, it was over. No blaze, no smoke, only vapor. Heavy, sticky, sweet, like melted wax left too long on flame. Machines were blackened, the earth scorched, but the chapel? Pristine, no burns, no splinters, no shattered glass. And the crucifix? Coated in frost, a delicate film. No explanation, no source. No sign of Moretti. They searched for 3 days. Found nothing except his boots, placed carefully at the altar steps. Laces tight, upright, filled with powder. Not ash, calcium, pulverized bone. But something didn't make sense. Fires don't burn that clean, and nothing burns that cold. The insurance team cried sabotage, filed claims, sued. The diocese remained silent. But one firefighter, 22 years on the job, came forward. He hadn't worked the scene, but he'd seen the pictures, and they disturbed him. The burn lines were too clean, too controlled, like something had traced the building's edges. Not fire, a barrier. He returned alone. No lights, no gear, just questions. He stood at the edge of the field, watched the chapel, and then he saw it. Not movement, not light, absence. A hollow in the darkness. Behind the door, a void. He turned to leave, and that's when he heard it. A bell, one chime, sharp, freezing. But the chapel hadn't had a bell in years. He left, sold his house, moved away. Before he left, he said one thing. It didn't burn because it wasn't fire, and it wasn't meant for us. The Everholt firm disbanded, declared bankruptcy. The land reverted to the state. No one came back, except her. In 1992, a woman in a long gray coat was seen walking the chapel's perimeter. She carried nothing, paused at each corner, kneeled, drew small circles in the dirt. With one finger, she was never identified. A week later, satellite thermal scans showed something beneath the chapel. Not flames, not electricity, a pulse, slow, rhythmic, alive. NASA flagged it, then deleted it, but one copy was saved, hand-delivered to the Vatican's Office of Paranormal Archives. No response. But the next day, a new crucifix appeared, brass, double-barred, anchored with silver bolts. Blessed. Not by clergy, not by word, but by silence. After that night, the land changed. No more smoke, no more frost. And the chapel doors? Sealed. Not locked, not jammed, just closed. To keys, to crowbars, to names. As if whatever had waited inside had finally shut. The door behind itself. The wind behaves differently now. It circles, soft, measuring, as though expecting an answer. There's no building, no wreckage, no debris, no sign anything ever stood there. Just level earth, silent. And yet, people stop at the hill's edge. They point, they whisper. It used to be there. You can feel it, can't you? They don't mean memory. They mean weight. Because the ground holds something. Not stone, not wood. Something else. Ashcroft Orphanage is gone, but not absent. The last official entry is dated October 14th, 1998. Harold Dunn, county surveyor, sent to confirm demolition. He arrived at dusk, took photos, measured. But when he returned to his truck, all the images were blank. No error, no exposure, just nothing. He came back the next morning, used a disposable camera. This time, he saw it, the chapel. Hole, gleaming. The stained glass caught the sun. It shimmered. He lifted the camera. clicked dot, then paused, because something was off dot. Children dot at the windows dot still, hands clasped, heads bowed, mouths open. They weren't singing, they were praying, individually, out of sync, murmurs, like fragments of memory, struggling to take form. He ran, dropped the camera. When he returned next day, it was gone again. Only flat ground, the wind, and the camera, half buried in dirt dot. He developed the roll. 10 frames. 9 were black. 1 wasn't. Frame 6, his own face reflected in the lens. And behind him, a single window pane dot with a child's hand pressed against the glass. Dunn left his job the next week, moved west, never filed the report. But before he left, he spoke with a local archivist. He asked one question: how do you bury something that isn't there? Today, the site is overgrown. Ragweed, thistle, a patch of wild rose that never blooms. Locals don't walk their dogs past it. Phones lose signal within a 20-foot radius dot, and compasses spin slowly dot, always to the left dot. A geologist once mapped the magnetic field around the area. He found it was inverted. That's not a technical term, but the readings curve backward, fold inward, like the land is pushing something down or holding something in dot. And sometimes, near sunset, you'll see something shimmer, not bright dot, not visible dot, just enough movement to catch in a car. Window dot in glass dot in the lake 2 miles downwind. A shimmer where nothing should be, shaped like a spire or a steeple or a chapel roof dot. If you stare too long, you'll see more. The faint arc of stained glass. A single bell rope, swaying dot, but not in the wind dot, like breath. Slow, heavy. Some say the site marks itself, that if you stand at the center, your watch will stop, that your footsteps sound different dot, muffled dot, like walking on wet cloth dot, and if you speak dot dot, even just once, your voice won't come back the same dot, as if the air holds onto it dot, waits dot, tastes it dot, and gives it back. Later dot, change dot. One woman, a hiker from Altoona, swears she heard her own voice days after visiting the site. She was alone dot, at home, brushing her teeth dot, and from the hallway came a sound, a breath, then her. Please, I'll be good. I'll be good. Her exact voice, but younger. A tone she hadn't used in decades. She never returned to. Ashcroft dot, no one does, but they still dream about it dot. Ask anyone who's lived in the valley long enough. Seen the steps dot, the door, the cross dot, always at dusk dot, always when the light fades just enough to trick the eye, and always with the same sound. Children dot, not laughing, not crying, but praying dot, low dot, together dot, and wrong. Words twisted, cadence broken dot, as if the prayer had been taught in reverse, spoken backward long enough to stain the tongue. One family passing through in 2005 tried camping near the hill. They lasted one night, said their son woke them in the dark dot dot, standing just outside the tent dot, eyes closed, mouthing something. When asked what he was doing, he said, "They taught me. They said I had to say it too." He couldn't remember who they or dot or what he said, but inside his sleeping bag, his parents found a small piece of paper, folded 12 times. When they opened it, it was blank dot, except for one thing, a single fingerprint, pressed in ash dot, and underneath it, in tiny handwriting, "We are the house now." No further attempts have been made to build on the site dot. No trespassing signs remain, but no one bothers enforcing them, because no one stays long. Some say it's just a story. Residual trauma dot, an old orphanage with a grim past and nothing more. But if you visit, if you find yourself standing there just as the sun drops behind the hill, don't speak, don't step past the grass line dot, and whatever you hear, behind you, above you, or inside you dot dot, don't answer, because Ashcroft doesn't want to be remembered dot, it wants to be heard. It was never about the children. It was about the faith that swallowed them. Ashcroft taught us that belief is not always a light dot dot. Sometimes it's the fire itself. The church never claimed the orphanage because maybe it never belonged to them. And if that chapel ever reappears, don't pray, just leave.